Right. So, like, of course, everyone, we all know, we're all aware, we're all talking about it. The fact that there is this BBC documentary about Prime Minister Modi and his, role in the Gujarat riots. And this documentary is being, so we do talk about it like it is banned in India. We'll, of course, get into like the, technicalities of that later. But there is a lot of, like we know that it's being taken down, tweets about it are being taken down. So and of course, like this is being done with the use of the new IT rules and with the emergency powers in the new IT rules. So can you explain, because this is obviously a very new thing, like the IT rules in itself and it being used in these ways. So can you say like how exactly, what is in the IT rules that allows the government to do this?
The government, or specifically the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, MIB, exercised its emergency powers under Rule 16 of the IT rules, and also Section 69A of the Information Technology Act of 2000, or the IT Act. Using these emergency powers, MIB essentially ordered social media platforms like YouTube and Twitter to take down links and block access to the documentary, and also prevent its re-upload. Now, what is this Rule 16 that was used under the IT rules to block access to the documentary? Basically, Rule 16 is used in situations wherein no delay is acceptable. And in such cases, there is an authorized officer that can examine the content and submit a written recommendation to the secretary of the MIB, who may then issue directions for blocking access. And they can do that without providing either the content creator or the intermediary an opportunity to be heard. Now, what's interesting is that this aforementioned authorized officer is actually the chairperson of the Interministerial Committee under the 3-tier mechanism that was established under the IT rules. And it's also responsible for the administration of the Code of Ethics. Now, both the 3-tier mechanism and the Code of Ethics is something that has been legally challenged in courts and even stayed by the Bombay and Madras High Court. So the entire, even from the appointment of the authorized officer to the exercise of its powers, this is all constitutionally suspect.
Okay, so it has also been stayed by the courts in a few places. And, you are saying that it is constitutionally suspect, but at the same time, it is still happening. And there is no clear redressal, right? Because it's not like, the fact that it's emergency powers means that the person is not going to be notified before their tweet is taken down, their website link is taken down. And also the person can't really do anything about it.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because there are several concerns actually. Firstly, the rules that allow for emergency blocking, the term emergency in itself has not been legislatively defined, and also something like emergency is not perpetual. So you rightly mentioned that citizens must be given an opportunity to challenge these orders, right? But they are unable to do so or cannot do so if the orders are not made publicly available. And that's something that we see happening a lot. Like this is sort of, I would say, a sort of a selective transparency that we see the government following when it comes to, or being transparent when convenient, right? Because we've seen several instances where these the emergency powers were used under Rule 16 by MIB. Since December 2021, actually, there have been 8 press releases, and that we can see that MIB put out itself. However, this tally, the number 8, is far lower than the one that is provided for by the Union Minister of Information and Broadcasting in the Parliament in July 2022. So clearly, there is this discrepancy, and this all points to the lack of transparency. The interesting thing here is the disclosures are usually made when it's related to populist issues. For instance, blocking of Pakistani content that's related to armed forces or on Jammu and Kashmir. obviously there has been no official press release for the online blocking of the BBC documentary. Um, so essentially, this is reflective, like I said, of the union government's practice of being transparent when convenient. And we only get to know about these A, when the government releases the press order, or B, when the platforms, for instance, Twitter, follow transparency measures by using mechanisms like, for instance, Twitter published the Lumen database, right? About Lumen database basically has the legal requests that the government sends for these blocking orders, basically the blocking requests. So this is how we find out. However, this is based either on the platform's decision to publish these orders or the government's voluntary act, and that is not really reliable. And in the long term, it can lead to executive overreach. I think to come to that question of whether the blocking was valid or not, we first need to answer two things. One, what is the reason behind this blocking? On what grounds were these? You mentioned the grounds under which, as per IT rules, such a blocking order can be issued. What were the grounds under which this constituted an emergency? And two, uh, were the sort of what do you say, the procedural safeguards that have been instituted. For instance, the authorized officer that gives in writing it's his or her recommendation to the secretary of the MIB. As per Rule 16, Sub Rule 3, the authorized officer must place the ban request before a review committee. And then the review committee decides whether or not to continue with the ban. And the review committee findings must also be made public. However, this step is altogether skipped in several cases. Right? So these safeguards, and then again, we go back to the fact that the reasons were not recorded in writing, it was not made public, etc., etc. In the absence of these steps being followed, it's very difficult to, question whether how much of this is justified, whether it actually created communal disharmony, etc., etc. It's very. I think we need to step back and first look at these questions, and then obviously there's the broader question about whether it should have been blocked in the first place. What are the consequences? What were the consequences in the absence of its blocking, and what are we seeing currently? Right? I've read so many places that it's been watched even more now that it's been blocked. So I guess we ultimately go back to the legislative safeguards that have been introduced not being followed by the government, and that's seen not just in this but several times in cases of where IT rules are used by the Indian government.
So what are all the rights according to you, like the constitutional rights, that are sort of not, it's not clear that they're being fully respected in this, with like how the ID rules are being used right now?
The first one being recording the reasons, right? I think it's ultimately boils down to the fact that there are constitutional provisions for government-led censorship. There is Rule 16 and there is Rule 69A, Section 69A of the IT Act. However, there are certain sort of safeguards in place, that have been placed both by the government and even the courts. The fact that these safeguards have been placed essentially there are for several reasons. One's to act as a check against government's discretion in such blocking matters, right? The other would be to essentially safeguard the content creators and intermediaries who host such content, and to basically protect the freedom of speech and expression. So the Supreme Court of India, in the case of Cricket Association of Bengal, recognized that the right to receive and impart information is implicit in free speech. Now, something like this, it's it's very fundamental. It's a very fundamental right to freedom of speech. And so in cases such as blocking of online content, it's very important that the content creators and intermediaries have those safeguards. Firstly, the first one being just being able to understand the reason behind the orders, right? So it's important that A, they are being recorded in writing, B, they are being publicly issued. In many cases, these orders are not publicly issued, right? This was also seen in Tanul Thakur, who's a movie critic, when his satirical website, the Dowry Calculator, was blocked, and he approached the High Court of Delhi and was ultimately able to obtain a copy of the blocking order. Because in his case, again, the blocking order was not sent to him. The other would be something as basic as, having judicial remedies, right? Having the option to challenge these orders. So in a lot of these cases, until most likely we've seen when there's a populist agenda, we see these safeguards or these rules being adhered to. But in other cases, it's not. And it's very, very problematic, right? Because it's in violation of our fundamental rights, and it's creating a pretense of a procedure which permits unlimited censorship by the government. And it boils down to the question of where are we placing free debate and free speech and expression in a digital and democratic country like India.